Hello and welcome to Portia, Raw and Real, the conversation, the podcast after the Portia show, where we get to do a deeper dive, look at some of the issues that maybe we didn't get to talk about on the show, or just sometimes we just run out of time and there was a whole lot more I wanted to get to. And that was surely the case with the episode where we had Afro-Latino and Afro-Latina conversation about what it means to be beyond the box, when one box just won't suffice. Our guests in that episode, absolutely incredible. History lesson, culturally speaking, and just so glad that you all were able to stay and have this conversation. I want to introduce you to Mike. Mike, ethnically speaking, Mexican, Black, Colombian, Native American. Jackii, my sister, is Dominican. And then we've got LaRayia, who, ethnically speaking, Haitian, Cuban, Puerto Rican. Yes, indeed. And then we've got Mario, who is Boricua.
New Eureka, baby, always.
But this was so eye-opening for so many reasons. And I just want to give more of an introduction, because I keep saying ethnically speaking, because when it's all said and done, you're Black Americans, but there's more to it. It's not a running away from or embracing. It is an all-inclusive conversation. But you're Americans.
Absolutely.
But that has not stopped people from all of your entire lives asking, what's the question?
What are you?
How annoying is
What
that?
you is in Atlanta?
How, and that as children and as adults.
Oh, absolutely.
Tell me more.
All the time. I think that people, it's funny because I just got back from Morocco and I told the woman I was Black and she said no. Like that was the response.
This was a Moroccan sister?
In Northern Africa.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting because, again, these boxes have been introduced to us. I always call them parasites because I feel like they become contagious and people, they try to give them to all of us. And that happens to me all the time, having to explain my identity, because when I don't speak, they don't understand, then they can hear, whether it's the language or even my accent, people will say, oh, you're Black. Or I definitely know there's something else.
Tell me, no one has said you're Black.
Yes, there's so many different
You're
things.
blackety black.
Yeah, well, they realize, because there's also this identity of like the nuance of if people think that you're ethnically ambiguous and you might have a Caucasian parent, which I don't have. So there's also that, which I have no proximity to even understand that, but that's how people like to put us in these spaces that have nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
And it's not people being inquisitive because they really are curious and want to know. It does come, like you had said earlier, it really comes from the space of where should I put you in the space of value? So there's a hierarchy, there's a space, and it always is connected to Black and Indigenous people.
Yeah.
And that's problematic. And
Being
we're
devalued.
absolutely.
Tell me more.
Just in general, as all being products of colonization, we know that the more you lean into the European, the more valued you are. You can see it in commerce when you start thinking about the Versace's, the Gucci's, all of the brands versus Black-owned brands. How long did FUBU last? It's not here no more. You know, and the more you lean into your Afrocentricity, the more devalued you are on a scale from a societal standpoint, but they don't understand we don't assess our value or our worth like that.
Yeah.
We assess it based on our community.
Jackii, you touched on this during the show about being Dominican and family members being raised to sort of, okay, you're Dominican, don't say you're Black, as a mark of oppression, not a, girl, don't tell them you Black, because you, but there was something deeper to that. Explain it, and you all kind of really spoke to it on some level.
Yes, I think that they did it. They were trying to protect me, and I also went to a predominantly white school. I already felt different. I would, deal with bullying in school as well. You're different, or you're too dark. And actually, 2 weeks ago, I just went through an experience where it came from a different side, but I was taking a picture, and in the picture there were 2 Black Americans, 1 white American, and then it was myself. And the 2 Black Americans said, "Oh, turn on the flash because there's two black people here," and they excluded me from that conversation.
How did that feel for something to have happened, I mean, that's recent.
Yes, that happened 2 weeks ago. I think for me, I was going to come from a place of love because I don't think that they meant it in a negative way or to exclude me, but I had to call them out on it. And I said, this is the reason why we're separated. You just separated me from, why do you think I'm less black? Is it because I speak Spanish? Is it because I'm Dominican? I identify as a Black Latina, as an Afro-Latina. So I had to call them out, and they accepted my you know, when I spoke to them about it. But it was something that often happens, you know, in different situations. And so that was something recent. But like I said, growing up and being around family, I think they did it from a place of, you know, just trying to protect me.
Right.
But it still hurt. And when you're young and you're not sure why they're doing it, you know, you're trying to understand, hey, why are they doing this?
Right,
You know, and
right.
why am I different? You know, so.
Yeah. I know so much of this for you. So all of you, New York origins,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But for you, Mike,
Yeah.
California.
California love.
Yeah.
You know,
And because you're also the youngest at the table, too, I feel like from a generational standpoint, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a little different for you.
Yeah.
Explain.
So the difference is now that my generation is older, they're actually more accepting of each other's multi-ethnic or multi-racial or just multi-identifying identities, really is what it is.
It doesn't have to be so much, pick one.
Yeah, it's in everybody. I would say like around my age for what is it, millennial? Yeah, millennials. They're actually mixed. They're mixed with something. So like, okay, you're just this and that. I'm that and this, but I'm not gonna sit up here and make you choose that because it makes me feel comfortable. Nor am I going to police you, as what many of us do is police each other on their identities and say, pick one. Or you can't do this because you're not that, or you're supposed to do this because you are that. It really limits the possibilities of what one can think of themselves in the world. Like to what my brother Mario was saying over here about the colonization or colonizer's mindset. When you start to adopt that, now you're starting to limit yourself and your peers based on that. So I just think that we need to get away from the policing and be more about the embracing of one's self in all factors of life.
That description of policing your identity, that is something, I saw you nodding. Was that something you agree with? Is that happening? And is it happening more so with people of color, among people of color, right? Because
Yes.
we've always sort of had our own hang-ups.
Well, I feel like it's both. And I feel like because the parasite of colonization is in everything.
Yeah.
So I can't say it's more black, it's more white, it's everyone, because the mindset has superseded just being from Caucasian people. You know, we've adapted these identities through trauma and the things that happen, but it's taken away from what's most important, which is how to unify.
Right.
It's taken away the biggest conversation, the biggest point that matters the most is black. And I always say from a painter's standpoint, you can't get brown without black. So if we can understand that on just a very,
Right.
very
Yes, ma'am.
elementary level,
Yeah.
that
Go on,
that
Painter.
unity, it's like we don't need to even think about what makes us different. What we need to think about is our story is the exact same.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
It's an indoctrination in the psychology of it all. I tell people all the time, I feel like the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was language and religion. Why? Because it started segmenting us and it prevented us from understanding one another because I can't understand your God or I can't understand your language. So now when you start to lump people based on languages, realizing that their identities may not be the same.
right, because if we took a picture of all the different folks from across the diaspora through Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa, and Europe who speak Spanish,
Yeah.
there's going to be a million different colors and faces,
Yeah,
right?
or if you just take language.
Or Portuguese.
Or
Right.
I read a book called Hispanic Nation that really was able to articulate how if you group all the Latin-speaking countries, you know, everybody from Mexico through Spain and everybody in between, you're going to realize that they don't share the DNA that you think they do, but they share the language.
Yep.
Whereas you look at the Caribbean and a Puerto Rican and a Jamaican and a Haitian and Dominican, share the same DNA.
Ah, right.
Hard
Which
work.
brings me to LaRayia. You have a bodega,
Yes.
and I think you said in the show.
God bless her bodega.
Look.
Yeah,
I was
listen,
thinking at
you
the
see my
beginning of
bowl
the
is gone.
show.
I ate it all before we could even start the podcast.
Yes, tell us more. Tell us more.
Stop.
Drinking coffee.
But I love, you said we all have a rice,
and we all have a bean.
Okay.
and which to me was just such an eye-opening moment because that is really, there's so many common denominators, but you say there's so many things that end up dividing
Absolutely.
the Afro-Latin experience.
Yeah, we're like fighting over cilantro and culantro. Like, you know what I mean? It's getting crazy. You know, and I feel like that takes away the most important thing. How do we come together? Because I just came back from Morocco. People look like Puerto Ricans there. I can find my uncle and cousin in every continent, in every space, in every.
Yeah.
And once we realize that, like you were saying about literally having the same DNA, it's global. And
Yeah.
Black people need to come together in that.
Yeah.
Period. It's like we have these conversations of division, but we do not have the conversation of what makes us the same.
Yeah.
Because we have the same aunties, the same. I was just having a strong debate with my best friend that I've had since I was 5 years old. She's Antiguan. Her parents are from the islands. And it was still this proximity and separation between Black American and Caribbean, and I'm like, this is the problem.
This
and
is
then,
it.
you know, we don't even need to get into colorism and those things because I
Right.
tell people all the
And
time,
hair
we
texture
get
and all, it
we
just
get
gets-
color struck. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, you know, it's not a monolith, and it doesn't create a proximity of closeness. It has to do with experience.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Mike,
made a comment earlier, and I want to be clear. Like, we make these blanket statements, not realizing that every blanket won't fit the same mattress.
that's a
So
good point.
in Atlanta, or in the Deep South in general, because I've been in the Deep South for about 26 years now, I've gotten a lot of questions on why I think I'm Black from white people, and then
So let me just pause.
The audacity.
I was about to cook too. Okay.
Right. Pause. Because you said people have asked you, why do you think you're Black? Like, briefly, and remind, I want to come to you about that police stop. Who asks, why do you think you're Black? Like, what's the setup
These
to
are
that?
actual, like, I've been in government contracting since 2005.
Ah, okay.
And coworkers would say that. People in the Air Force would say that. Like, why do you think you're Black? And it always came from the Caucasian demographic because they couldn't understand that this isn't cosplay. I walk into every hood in the United States and I'm comfortable because I am of that culture. I understand it. I lived in Baltimore for 13 years and never had an issue because I reinvest into my communities where I go. I don't look and try to find out ways to partition and hide myself.
Right.
And when I came to Atlanta, I'm a poet, so the first time I performed at Apache, back when it was still on Spring and 3rd, and I got busy, Georgia Me and Queen Sheba were the hosts, and they're like, where are you from? And they were like, I was trying to avoid going into the ethnic conversation, so I
Right.
was like, yo, they're like, what are you? I was like, yo, I'm human. And they said,
Nice.
and they looked at me and they go, you're one of us, though.
That's it. That's it.
You're
That's
welcome.
it. I want to talk to you, Mike, about the police stop. Tell us
Yeah.
about what happened. How old were you and what happened?
So I was 17 years old. I'm already late to school. Like, I woke up late. You know how high school is. You don't really want to be there all the time because, again, more indoctrination and whatnot. So anyways, I'm on my way to school. It's about 3 miles from my house, and I'm walking. Then I go through a predominantly white neighborhood to get to my school. As I'm walking, I notice a police car starting to just trail me, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to engage in fear and, like, start to track to it because I believe whatever is in you is going to come from the outside and get you too.
Smart.
So then I just keep walking, but then the police car, before I go down a road, which would have limited his proximity to me, came, swerved off and said, hey, you fit the description of somebody who robbed a house or whatever.
And what did you say?
I said, how do I fit that description? Like what qualifies me for your description? Officer did not want to disclose any information, just said you look like it. So now I'm being profiled. All right, cool. So then tells
Did he
me,
ever tell you that they were looking for a Hispanic male, a Black male, a caramel colored? I mean, what? There was nothing.
just said I fit the description. All right, cool. Whatever. I'm saying, hey, I need to go to school. I'm already late for class. Trying to explain to the officer, I need to go learn. You know, I'm not trying to be stuck in this. Officer did not care at all. Literally stuck me up for hemmed me up for about 2 hours, waiting for a call from the precinct just to confirm or deny. It ultimately turned into a denial, But in that process of me literally being detained for no reason, looked at my ID card and said, Michael Cortez. You're like, you're like looking at me, looking at the ID, looking at my name, trying to box me
Trying to
in.
make it,
Trying to
trying to
assess
make
your
it make
value.
sense.
Yeah.
Right.
It was like, so then he asked me, he was like, He was like, what are you? And I said, what you mean? He said, your name is Michael, your last name's Cortez. He said, so what you black or you Mexican?
He wanted to know if something happened, which organizations and which groups were going to come after him.
And not just that too, but also like, how do I want to treat him now? Because if let's say he says that he's black, in California, at least from my experience, what I've learned is that black folks, they tend to get, and this could be wrong or it could be erroneous, but they tend to get more poorly treated by police officers as compared to our Latin counterparts, especially if they're of a lighter shade. So
Interesting.
if I was like, well, I'm both.
Yeah.
And he said, So I met one of those.
In
Wow.
California?
That's what I said.
Okay. Anyway, so
No, for real.
No, which is just interesting because to me, I associate California as being a place that is one of the most populous of just seeing everybody under the rainbow.
That's why I'm
One of
laughing.
those.
I want to
Crazy.
have a conversation with you about. We talked about it briefly on the show. My freshman year, Howard University, which means fall of 1991, which means 30 plus years ago, right? We were all in the dorm. We were all talking about, getting ready to watch Different World, and the sisters with relaxers were talking about touch-ups and whatnot.
Yes.
And somehow it came up. Was sister said, "I'm not black. I'm Dominican," and they pounced on her.
Yes.
And I remember the first time I had heard it, I didn't pounce, but I was like, "What do you mean?" But not in a judgmental way. But there was some judgment, and she was like, "I'm not black. I'm Latina." But it was, I'm Dominican.
Yes.
But because her skin was, beautiful mocha brown,
Yes.
and because she had new growth,
Yes.
And she's at a HBCU.
right, and she's at HBCU, was 4C
Come on,
pattern.
Yes.
So she did her best, we did our best, and we understood.
Yes.
But how would you handle that in this space in 2025? Without having to explain your whole identity every single time, but have this kind of conversation with people who ask that question.
For me personally, I would just say you can be two things. You can be black and you can be Latina. You can be black. You can be, Hispanic. There's three different things, like you mentioned at the beginning of the show. There's race, there's ethnicity, and there's nationality. And I feel like when people start understanding those three things, it'll be easier for them when you're having these conversations, for them to understand where you're coming from when you identify yourself as that.
Right.
And I feel a lot of times, I get stopped and people ask me, where are you from? So when
And I imagine you...
I say I'm from New York. I say I'm
I'm
from
from
New
New
York.
York, yeah.
And so then they go, no, I mean, where are you really from?
Where you from?
And so they're trying to, where
Right.
are you from?
From
Yeah,
the
heritage.
double preposition makes it...
Exactly. And then
Oh,
I'll,
you black,
and
black.
then I'll ask, I'll say, you mean what's my ethnicity? And then I'll educate them and say, well, I'm Dominican.
Yeah.
I was born here in America. My parents are from the Dominican Republic, and they'll have a nice
Yeah.
conversation with them and try to have them understand where, when you ask that question, what it really means. So.
And I think for the sisters who identified as, and you identify as black, but
Yes.
as a black, my mama's black, my daddy's black,
Yes.
they felt hurt because it
Yes.
felt like there was a rejection of being
Yes.
a black woman,
And
right?
there was.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
There was. Like,
Yeah.
let's
And
be
she-
clear,
And that's a
that
big
happens
problem.
very often.
And she felt hurt, right? Because she
100%.
felt like it was a rejection of her being
Yes.
Latina, right?
Yeah.
But that's the issue. I tell people all the time, when you understand the colonized markers,
Yes.
Right.
when it comes to language and the things
And
that
explain
people...
that term, colonized markers,
So-
for someone
so-
who's hearing that for the first time.
Okay,
and
so-
watching this podcast.
So basically, the Caribbean, depending if it was France or the Spaniards who colonized the area, it has to do with the language. So a lot of times when people argue about that, I explain to them from the American side, it's the same thing as having the last name Washington.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the
Right, right.
and being able to understand English is not our first language
Right.
Yeah.
as black people, right?
Yes.
In going to the Caribbean. Spanish is not our first language.
Right.
So when we understand that language is a colonized marker, and that's what we're really fighting for. We're fighting for who the plantation master was.
And that's all that is.
And that's what we're identifying with, more with the plantation master than the indigenous people of the community.
Right.
And of course, that came from a lot of brutality that indigenous people were met with.
Yeah.
So a lot of it has to come with trauma and survival, but it still needs to be dismantled because there's no progression in that.
There's something I want
Yeah.
to say about that too. And I'm pretty sure y'all noticed this, but in a lot of European languages, they have a word for hope and a word for fear. But a lot of indigenous languages, they do not have a word for hope or fear. These are two things that do not exist. So what I say that is, again, the language shapes your world, which shapes what you're going to say about yourself, and it shapes your possibilities of self.
But still doesn't correct for what people want to, that basic, here's what I see, so here, make it fit what I see, which
Right.
is not fair.
But the
Which is
glasses
what-
were given to us.
Yes,
So-
there's like this monopolization of our misery.
Right.
Because we are sitting in the birthplace of civil rights, we hold it with two hands, and we acknowledge and we respect it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't devalue what was going on the slave plantations in DR and Haiti and Puerto Rico
The
Breaker
and all these
Islands.
other locations.
Yeah.
Again, we try to find other ways to separate ourselves instead of leaning in. And that example that you just gave about the young lady saying that, no, I'm Dominican, how mad can I get at a victim? You don't get mad at
Right.
the
Right.
person that got shot, the person that got sexually assaulted. This
Right.
person is a byproduct
embracing.
of centuries of that same level of oppression.
Yeah.
So when they are speaking, to her point, not only are we speaking with someone else's tongue in our mouth, we're
Right.
starting to think thoughts with somebody else's logic.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Well, a very good point, and I thank you for making this distinction. As we wrap up here, I want to talk about the representation publicly being able to identify, like seeing Zoe Saldana the other day, talking, obviously getting this award for a movie where she got to speak Spanish the whole
A little
time.
problematic.
That's
Look, I don't know. It's a
very
little
problematic.
problematic.
let's talk about that.
There
because
isn't
I think
enough
for-
representation,
Right,
right? So
exactly.
Even when you look at Telemundo and the
Especially
novellas and what we
Mm-hmm.
have, there isn't representation even what's here at this table.
Yes.
And what makes that problematic is all skin folk aren't kinfolk.
Okay.
Because if the mind isn't decolonized, if we don't have our thoughts that are originally ours, then that doesn't represent us. That becomes the new blackface,
Yes, ma'am.
but internalized within our own community. So it makes it difficult because, again, there still isn't this range because they want to keep boxes. So only certain people can, like, I always say that. I'm like, my representation growing up was the cop from New York Undercover.
Oh my God.
Literally. So I'm like, that was
Torres, Detective Torres.
I was like, there's a Bodie. Like, but that was my representation. That's all I had. And I couldn't relate to J-Lo because there was no, she doesn't wear her hair curly. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's proximity
Rosie,
too.
though?
Celia Cruz. Celia
Right.
Cruz.
Well, Celia Cruz, that's our little kid.
Yeah, right.
That was
Celia Cruz is our little kid.
that's hilarious.
Oh,
She just got
That's
a girl in
Instead
the
of
that
doing
is-
the colors,
I get it.
That.
Yeah.
The
I
wings
got
to
it.
match the monochromatic.
Yeah, Celia Cruz is a big representation, but I think in the media right now, we're
Yeah.
in 2025, we see some improvement, right? But there are so many Afro-Latinos
Yeah.
in the Latino countries, and we don't see that.
Right.
We don't see that, and it's so clear. And I think that we need to keep improving and keep pushing for change. But it is so important. There's two Telemundo. We're talking about Telemundo
Right.
and Univision, right? Those are two channels, right? And it took them so many years. I think last year was the first time that they put an Afro-Latino in one of their morning shows.
Wow.
And it
One.
won.
I didn't
And so
even
it's a drop
think
in the
about
bucket.
that.
But it's change, right? It's change. But we need to see more of it.
Yeah.
I
This
think
little incremental change is not enough. I'm
It's
a
not
firm
enough.
believer, to your point, how do we change the narrative of what Afro-Latinos are
Yeah.
and what it looks like and what it is get active in your community.
Yeah.
Listen, you know, Portia, I got two nonprofits. I got Manifest Destiny and I got Undugu that we do work in the community. The more they see us on Front Street, the more the narrative changes. She serves people every day.
Right.
They have to go
Name of the
see her
bodega.
shop.
LaRayia Bodega.
Yeah,
They
here
have
in
to
Atlanta.
see the shop. They have to see 100% black owned and 100% Afro-Latina.
Right.
And embrace it and not fight
Realizing
with you about
it's
it.
the same.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we end up feeling like we have to almost apologize for those that don't see it the same way.
Yeah.
So there's conflict in my own family from political perspectives, from social perspectives. That right there, when we start thinking about identifying as black, but somebody wants to hold on to that white part, that creates conflict, and I almost feel like it's my job to overcompensate.
Yes.
I think. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So representation in media also has to do with checking that box of the census data. I remember when I did go to Veracruz, Mexico, I was learning a lot from the black Mexicans that were down there, and they were actually pushing their census bureau to include Afro-Mexican on it. And when they did, they noticed an increase in that Afro-Mexican identification check. And then even meeting the
Which to
different
me speaks to the
Afro-Mexicans there.
generation that it feels like there's just more space
Yes.
that younger people have sort of taken on. They no, I'm not going to pick a box anymore.
Yeah.
I'm
And
not
it's
doing it.
reclaiming. It's
Yeah.
reclaiming
Yeah.
It
the
is
erasure
reclamation.
because that's intentional.
Yeah.
And it's saying like, no, we are not. You can't erase us. You can't take us away. And I think right now, if there was enough the right representation, these conversations wouldn't need to be had.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we know that clearly what's being represented and what people understand, there's not enough of it.
My last question as we wrap this up, and I wish that I still had something left in my bowl, but I ate it all because that was so good. What was it? Just real quick, just say what we had to eat.
It's a vegan sancocho.
Gotcha.
And so it usually is served with meat, but you
Yeah.
did jackfruit.
Jackfruit and mushrooms.
Okay.
It was good. So I just wanted you to understand what the bowls were here for because it was good. I didn't have enough discipline to carry it over.
Jackie's still trying to eat like a lady. I was
Jackie,
over there
right? Jackie's
being
still following.
total savage.
But my last question as we wrap up, and Mario, I know you have children. You all are going to have children. At least
Yes.
that is what you would like.
Yes.
I want to hear just briefly, what will you tell your children to make sure that they understand the scope of what it means to be Afro-Latina, Afro-Latino, and still unapologetically black?
Right. I think it goes a lot to this conversation and talking about the history. If we talk about the history of all sides and see and really instill that pride of what it is to be Haitian, Boricua, Dominican, Mexican, Colombian, Native American, all that, and teach our kids each one of these groups have greatness in them despite the colonization and the oppression they faced. And look at the ingenuity that came about it. I think that will really instill confidence, pride, self-esteem, and even self-love. So whenever I have my children and the baby's firstborn, I'm gonna tie all the flags of their nations around them and then have them a family crest underneath the child. And then that's gonna be that.
Wow, Jackii.
I think
You gotta
for
paint that.
me, it's going to be very important for my children to know that they're black. They can be both black and Latino. But I think that for me, I'll make sure to communicate to them, you're black first because you're in America. And so as long as they know that they're black first, they obviously know their culture, their Latino culture, but in America, we're black first.
Will you teach them Spanish?
Absolutely.
See?
I think for me, that was my first language. I love that I can fluently speak Spanish when I
Yeah.
go to different places around the world and go to restaurants. And, I love that part of my culture. And so I definitely want to teach them Spanish, even though our household, it's not everyone in our household will be speaking Spanish,
Yeah.
but I definitely want to teach them the language so we don't lose it.
Quick question, in your travels, when you
Yes.
are speaking Spanish, do people from all over the world in all of your travels also ask you in various languages, where are you from?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Always do.
Hey, we gonna speak
Everyone.
Not a day
Spambatics.
goes by without that question being asked.
Proud dog mom, LaRayia.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm a cat daddy.
What will you tell your nieces and nephews?
My multi-poos know they're black.
You multi-food.
They know they're, no, I think it's important. Just anyone, people need to know like we're one people and the unity. So it's important for us to know so that we can recognize our brothers and sisters when we see them. And I think it's more about that unity and embracing one another and understanding that it's all the same. Like he said, religion, these markers that separate us, they're not even important. What's important is we literally have the same journey, but we just ended up in different places.
Right, literally the
Same
same
exact journey, but we're
Same
trying to measure
ship,
wounds.
Yes.
different stops
Very much
along the way in the Atlantic slave trade. It's so
Exactly.
well said. Mario, I'm going to give you the last, as the father at the table and the mellifluous poet, just your final thought here for the next generation, for your daughters and their friends.
Can I say a little bit?
I mean, a little bit in a little bit of time, as in 30 seconds.
Simple. Virtues are transparent, and the two cultures that converge in their souls speak the same language. The language of love, the language of Borinquen, the language of America is all black. And as long as you paint yourself in that color, you can add whatever seasoning you want.
Ah,
Come on,
well
we cooking.
said, well said.
Salud.
A
Salud.
toast.
Man, everybody got their coffee. I drink mine.
Yeah, I don't mind, so you know. Listen, I just want to thank you so much. Quick wrap, where people can find you on social media.
You can find me at mcomnimedia.com. Sorry, only 27-year-old without an Instagram.
That's brilliant.
You can find me at Jackii O whatever.
Jackii O whatever.
Jackii with 2 I's, JACKIIO whatever.
Thank you for that distinction.
Instagram, LaRayia or LaRayya's Bodega.
Instagram, I am Mario A. Reyes.
I am Portia Bruner, and I am honored to have had this conversation with all of you. Thank you for your candor. Thank
As
you
we
for the
are.
clarity. Thank you for speaking your truth and speaking truth to power. Be sure to go check out the full conversation that we had on Portia. Go to portiashow.com. Great show. And then if you know someone who is struggling with this, or maybe just not struggling, just trying to do a better job of getting it right, tell them to check out this podcast, Portia, Raw and Real. Thank you so much for watching. Hey, we'll see you on Portia. Weekdays at 1 on Fox 5 and Fox stations in Orlando, San Francisco, and streaming on Fox Soul. Hey.
Come on now, you know, we gotta have that sauce, bro.
Thank you.